With the 2023 Western States 100 fast approaching, I thought it would be a good time to take a look back over the race's history to help understand why it has become the most important race in the ultra running calendar. If you're new to the sport or unfamiliar with the race, Western States is essentially the Boston Marathon of ultra running, with its status as the oldest trail 100 miler and the difficulty in just qualifying for the race. It's easy to see the similarities, but there's more. Much like Boston, Western States has a net downhill course, a favourite with running purists due to how runnable the course is with very little hiking required. Don't underestimate the climbing though. A total of 18,000 foot of incline, including the brutally hot climbs in and out of the canyons. To clarify though, it's not the first 100 miler. In fact, 100 mile road and track events have been taking place since the 19th century. I'd recommend reading Adurinnam Finn's Rise of the Ultra Runners if you want to learn more about that. It's also not the first trail ultramarathon, with races such as the JFK 50 starting back in the 60s. It is though widely accepted as the first 100 mile trail race. Let's jump into it. Back in 1955, 6 riders rode their horses 100 miles from Tahoe City to Auburn along the Western States Trail, proving that it was possible to do so in under 24 hours, and the annual horse race known as the Tevis Cup was born. The story goes that in 1974, rider Gordy Ainsley's horse went lame, so he decided to complete the race on foot, doing so in just under 24 hours, and thus establishing the Western States Endurance Run. In reality, the race had actually been completed on foot in the past. Back in 1972, a troop of soldiers were permitted to take part to see if it was possible to complete on foot. 7 made it, but in a time of 44 hours, making Gordy still the first to complete the course in under 24 hours. Another piece to the story is that Gordy's horse actually went lame the year before, in 1973, and he DNF'd at mile 30. Unable to sort another horse in time for the 1974 race, the race organisers, knowing that it was possible to complete on foot due to the soldiers' efforts in 1972, encouraged Gordy to take part on foot. This meant that he had time to prepare. He stashed supplies out on the course, and I imagine he did some sort of training. I only mention this as, hearing the story many times, I know at least I had interpreted it as a spur-of-the-moment decision. With his horse going lame near or just before the start, he just decided to tough it out on foot. That doesn't take away how impressive and groundbreaking his effort was though. To complete in under 24 hours with no established best practices for fueling, cooling, or even what kit to wear, Gordy proved it was possible. But he wasn't the founder. It was Wendell Roby, founder of the horse race, who should be credited with founding the run as well. 3 years later, he was able to organise the official first Western States 100 mile endurance run to take place alongside the horse race in 1977. Another point of note, and again, not to take away from what Gordy achieved, but in 1980 the course was accurately measured for the first time and found to be short at only 89 miles. Unsurprisingly really, given that the route was established in 1955 for a horseback race. After this, more miles were added, but in 1985 it was again measured and found to only be 93.5 miles, meaning that more course adjustments were required to bring it up to 100 miles. So with Western States not actually being 100 miles until 1985, it does throw up the question around the validity of Western States calling itself or being referred to as the longest running 100 mile trail race, given that Old Domination 100, founded a couple years after Western States in 1979, is also still going strong today. Back to the racing. In 1977, the race consisted of 14 runners, taking place alongside, but not against, 200 horses. Only 3 finished, with the first winner, Andy Gonzalez, being the only one inside the 24-hour cutoff, in a time of 22:57. That convinced organisers to increase the cutoff to 30 hours from 1978, and that still stands to this day. 1977 was also the only time the race took place alongside the horses. In 1978, Gordy Ainsley took part in the official race for the first time, improving on his previous effort, finishing in 22 hours 40 minutes for 10th place, with Andy Gonzalez becoming a back-to-back champ and knocking 4 hours off his previous time, finishing in 18:50. We also had the first female finisher in 1978, Pat Smythe, just inside that 30-hour cutoff at 29:34. The rising popularity of the race meant that by 1981 the lottery system was introduced due to the limited amount of 369 participants, the maximum allowed due to the legislation protecting the trail, with golden ticket races introduced shortly after. Skipping forwards to 1984, Jim King recorded what is now considered the short course record in 14:54. Then, after the additional miles were added, he became the first actual 100 mile finisher in 16 hours and 2 minutes. There were some further route changes again in 1986, but since then, the route has remained the same, except for a few temporary route diversions. The mid-80s also saw the race being televised for the first time on ABC's Wide World of Sport, which propelled the race into the eyes of runners nationwide nationwide. Then, as the decade was closing out, 1989 ushered in an era of absolute dominance on the women's side, with Ann Trason winning the first of her 14 Western States victories, which would have all been back-to-back if not for a 1999 injury that stopped her from participating. To this day, she is the most successful Western States runner and one of the all-time greatest in our sport. Ann's 1994 course record of 17:37 also lasted all the way up until 2012. The early 90s saw entries of over 1,000 runners for the first time, with runners not just across the US but from all over the globe dreaming of their chances to run at Western States. In 92 we saw the first win of another all-time Western States great, Tim Tweedemeyer. He had actually been participating since 1981, with his win in 92 being his 11th finish. In total, Tim now has 5 wins and 25 finishes, all under 24 hours, including 15 consecutive top 5 finishes. We ended the 20th century with a men's course record of 15 hours and 40 minutes set by Mike Morton in 1997, along with that previously mentioned 1994 Ann Trason course record of 17 hours 37 minutes. Just before we welcomed the new millennium though, another all-time great arrived. In 1999, Scott Jurek won the Western States 100 on his first attempt, defeating 5-time champ Tim Tweedemeyer in the process. He then went on to become the most dominant men's champion in the race's history, winning it 7 consecutive times, as well as lowering the course record to 15:36 in 2004. Also in 2004, we saw Nikki Kimball win the first of her 3 victories, the others coming in 2006 and 2007. In 2006, there was major finish line drama, with leader Brian Morrison collapsing on the track and requiring assistance to get back to his feet and cross the line, which ultimately led to his disqualification and a win for Graham Cooper. There's a fantastic Ginger Runner video here on YouTube documenting this and Brian's attempt to finally finish the race a decade on in 2016. I'd thoroughly recommend. Also, in 2006, a live webcast of the race tracking was introduced, with in excess of 23,000 visitors tuning in over race weekend, showing just how popular the race had become. 2008 saw the race cancelled for the first time due to the smoke and bad air quality caused by the California wildfires that year. The only other year that the race hasn't run was of course during the 2020 pandemic. From that first television appearance in 1985, the coverage that Western States has received is what has truly driven it to stand out above all other ultramarathons. Whether that be the regular mentions on television throughout the 90s, the 2001 film A Race for the Soul produced by PBS, or the countless books mentioned in the race, such as 2009's Born to Run. So by 2010 it was obvious that there was an appetite for Western States action to be captured, which brings us on to the race that features in what I still believe is the greatest ultra running film ever made, Unbreakable. Released in 2012, I'd highly recommend watching if you haven't already, and if you haven't, skip to this timestamp to avoid spoiling that 2010 result, as the closeness of the racing is what makes that film so good. You had Hal Kerner, winner in 2007 and 2009, lining up against a young Kilian Jornet, who was already a 2-time UTMB winner. Then there was 2-time Leadville winner and fan favourite Anton Krupicka, and Jeff Rose, who had never lost a 100-miler. The 4 men led the race together for nearly 40 miles, before Hal and then Jeff dropped off the pace. The heat then finally defeated Kilian around mile 80, leaving Anton to cruise home for victory. Or so we thought. Somehow Jeff had overcome his earlier issues and charged back to pass Anton at mile 94, winning the race and setting a new course record of 15:06. These tightly contested elite level showdowns are now synonymous with Western States, but that film certainly helped show that to the masses and show what Western States was all about. The success of that film also increased the interest in coverage over the race, and since then, barely a year goes by without a film being made. Some must-watches are that previously mentioned Ginger Runner film featuring Brian Morrison's return to the race, and pretty much all of Billy Yang's films covering the race, with the highlight being Life in a Day. In 2011, Kilian Jornet would return to the race and become the first European winner, and Ellie Greenwood of Scotland would match that feat on the women's side. Ellie returned the following year to smash Ann Trason's long-standing course record and become the first woman under 17 hours, finishing in 16:47. A record that even now, in the most professional and competitive era of the sport, where all other course records at major races are broken fairly regularly, is still standing. Although, if you've watched my previous video about Courtney Dauwalter, this year could be the year that finally falls. 2012 also saw the men's record lowered under 15 hours for the first time, with Timothy Olsen running 14:46. In 2014, Rob Krah also managed this feat, becoming the second person to break 15 hours, and the following year, on his way to winning for the second time, he missed out on the course record by 2 minutes. We're now into the modern Western States era, into what I like to call the Walmsley years. 2016 wasn't won by Jim though. In one of the most overlooked performances in recent years, the youngest ever champion prevailed, 20-year-old Andrew Miller. Jim took the headlines though. His rapidly rising reputation going in, plus some of his own pre-race comments, meant that everyone was expecting a special debut, but I don't think many expected him to be nearly 40 minutes up on course record pace by mile 62. Then, at mile 92, clearly fatiguing due to his blistering pace, he took a wrong turn and ended up being found by his crew on Highway 49, losing the race lead in the process. An incident that dominated the post-race discussions. And again, another film recommendation would be Found on 49, which covers Jim's 2016 race. 2017 would show us that Jim had not learnt from his mistakes. In one of the hottest races on record, he tore off under course record pace and eventually blew up, DNFing at mile 70. Ryan Sands would go on to take the win in the slowest time of the decade, in 16 hours and 19 minutes, which highlights how tough conditions were. In the women's field, the slow, tough conditions left the door open for an unexpected winner. Kat Bradley is the last person to have won, having gained entry via the lottery. Typically, the race is won by an athlete who's either a returning top 10 finisher or has raced in via the golden ticket system, proving that they are one of the best on the planet already. So to see someone coming in via the lottery and winning is very special and not something that I think we'll see again. 2018 is when things finally clicked for Jim, winning and breaking the course record, lowering it to 14 hours 30 minutes, and putting a stamp on 3 years of ridiculously fast efforts that will surely go down in Western States folklore. That year we also saw Courtney Dauwalter debut and win the race, a runner that looks nothing short of certain to win again this year in 2023, and with all the race build up over the next month, I'm sure you'll hear all about Courtney's chances of breaking the course record as well. Low temperatures in 2019 meant fast racing, with Jim Walmsley lowering his own course record to 14 hours and 9 minutes, and the top 3 all finishing under 15 hours, including Tom Evans, who became the first runner from outside of North America to break that barrier. We then also had the entire top 10 finishing in under 16 hours, and the first then continued on the women's side, with the top 3 women all finishing in under 18 hours, with Claire Gallagher taking the win. The good conditions also brought the highest finisher rate in the race's history, with 319 of the 369 starters crossing the finish line. After the 2020 cancellation, the race returned in 2021, and Jim Walmsley picking up right where he left off, this time winning comfortably in 14:46, an hour and a half ahead of second place Tyler Green. As the men all blew up trying to stay with Jim throughout the first half of the race, it became all about the women's race. A compelling battle was eventually won by Britain's Beth Pascal, who ran the second fastest time in the race's history, finishing 7th overall, with the top 3 women all finishing inside the top 10 overall and 9 women inside the overall top 20. This was also the first year of the start to finish livestream, which has become a must-watch for ultra-running fans. Okay, we're almost done. 2022. So with Jim's move to France and his focus elsewhere, it was time for a new champion to be crowned. Most had their money on Hayden Hawkes, who ran with Jim throughout the first half of the 2021 race, but newcomer to the sport Adam Peterman had other ideas. In his first 100 miler, he ran smart and didn't take the lead until mile 75. He appeared to only get stronger after that and won the race comfortably in the end, becoming the first man since 1986 to win the race in his 100-mile debut. Ruth Croft also looked incredibly comfortable, pulling clear of a stacked women's field and running the 3rd fastest time in the race's history. So that brings us up to date. I'm incredibly excited about this year's race and we'll have some preview videos dropping in the lead up. For now, let me know in the comments if you've been lucky enough to run at Western States or if you've got any amazing stories from crewing or spectating the race. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll be back soon with more ultra running content. Cheers.